Hello and welcome. My name is Max. I write books under the pen name Gemma Tate, and I'm starting a book club. Like many of you, I read primarily for escapism, sometimes to learn something, and lately the type of books that I normally read just have not been cutting it. The type of books that I write haven't really been cutting it either, frankly. Romance feels just a little bit too low stakes, a little bit too trite for the world that we live in, which, especially if you live in the US, is kind of on fire. And nonfiction and dystopia feel just a little bit too close to home. So, starting a book club. Each month, I'm picking a book that I feel hits the balance of escapist and fantastical, but also grounded and socially conscious, or at least socially aware, and I'm inviting you all to read with me. This month's pick for January of 2025 is Starling House by Alix E Harrow. Like any book club, the idea is to keep it casual. Make a drink, whether that's a cocktail or just a nice cup of tea. Read as much of the book as you want to, and then come back here. We'll drink and yap. It'll be great. Okay, now that I have a beverage in hand, let's talk about Starling House. I will do my best to keep this spoiler-free, but proceed with caution from this point on. If you haven't read it yet, you might want to do that and then come back here, or just keep on watching and be aware that some things might be spoiled for you. I think that Starling House is best described as a cozy, Southern Gothic horror, but not really. The vibes are kind of like a raccoon in a really gorgeous rundown house. The setting is really gilded and beautiful, but there's a definite rotten undercurrent under all of it, and it might bite, but you can't help but root for it, and I do mean that in the absolute best way. I think Starling House might not be a book for everyone. I personally loved it because I like weird magical realism, and I grew up in the South, and I have some big feelings about the coal mining industrial complex, which set me up to like the book a lot. And it gave me the background and the context to see the book for what it is, which is a scathing critique of the sociological and ecological detriments and consequences of the coal mining industry. I have come across more than a few reviews that didn't like the book and said that the big bad evil corporation didn't feel real and that no one family really has that much power in certain parts of the South, and that it didn't seem like a company could really own a town like that. I'm a historian and I'm from the South, and so I feel the need to quickly provide just a little bit of history and maybe context for those who read this book without that background. Harrow goes into this at the end of the book, and I think that it deserves a little bit more attention than it receives in the author's note. Starling House is set in Kentucky, in a town called Eden. Eden is a not particularly subtle parallel to Paradise, Kentucky, which is very real. So coal mining throughout much of the South, particularly the Appalachian Mountain Range, has been a really horrible, awful thing for the environment and also for the people who live in towns near the mines. Essentially, coal mining companies would buy huge areas of land and then use enslaved Black or very low-income white workers to blast their way down with really super minimal regard for injuries, gas exposure, or what we now call black lung, which is essentially where you inhale so much coal dust that it literally turns your lungs black and they stop working. In the meantime, the process of blasting creates a truly dumb amount of waste product, which tends to pool up in local water sources, rendering groundwater unsafe unless it's super heavily treated, and usually it wreaks absolute havoc on the ecosystems around any river mouths or tributaries. And trees stop being able to grow as a result, both from disruption to the ground messing with the roots, and again, that water becoming super unsafe and unusable. If you go visit certain parts of Kentucky and West Virginia to this day, there's still a really heavy mining presence there, and you can literally look out at the tree line and see with your own eyes where the mines start and end, because it's where the mountains go gray and bare and sad instead of colorful and leafy. It's especially evident in the summer and the fall, and it is incredibly sad to see. Now, you might be thinking, hey, the people who live in coal mining towns like Paradise, Kentucky, or its fictional equivalent in Starling House, Eden, should just leave, which, sounds totally fair, except that they couldn't, because the companies who owned the mines created these things called company towns. If you're not familiar with what a company town is, one, you should do that research. Two, I'm going to give you a little bit of background on it. If you're familiar with sharecropping, it's a similar setup, and I do mean that in the absolute worst way. Basically, the company paid you to do the work in the mines, but they didn't pay you in real money, they paid you in company money. And you could use company money to buy your groceries and to pay your rent, because the company owned your house and they owned the grocery store. They also probably owned the gas lines or electric if you were in a place lucky enough to have electricity. If you wanted to leave, good luck, because you're not paid in real money, you're paid in company money. So you don't have actual currency that's of any use to you anywhere else you go. And if you owe the company anything like back rent, because they, keeping in mind, they set your rent, they also pay your wages. This is a really common thing for them to do. They would set your rent higher than what you could afford with your wages so that you would go into debt, so that your children would have to leave school early to go work in the mines. So now the next generation is also indebted, also only has company currency, and now does not have the education to leave the town. And a generation further removed from that won't even have enough knowledge of what's out there in order to want to leave. And it's bad. Now, this all sounds super unethical and super unsafe, and probably shouldn't have been allowed to happen, right? And yet. Also, this should sound familiar to you if you are familiar with the Hunger Games, because yes, it is the setup for District 12. Please let me know if you want a video on how our history in the United States informs the world setup in the Hunger Games books, because oh boy do I have thoughts. Anyway, Paradise, Kentucky got bought out by the Tennessee Valley Authority in 1967 and was deemed uninhabitable, reverting to government land. Starling House, the book, we're here to talk about a book, right? This is a song about Alice, plays a sort of what-if game. What if Eden, the fictional equivalent, hadn't been bought out by the government? What if the coal mining company mostly just converted to a gas power enterprise and just kept on going, kept on owning everything? What if, when company towns were made mostly illegal, all of the families who'd stuck around still didn't have the resources to get out and just got stuck keeping on living there? I should also note that there are literally hundreds of towns in the United States, mostly in Kentucky and West Virginia, where that is absolutely still the reality. Starling House hits real close to home for me. Oh, and what if, at the center of the story, there was a series of women born into the family that owned it all, who were all treated so poorly by a system that only saw them as a way to continue providing children to keep it all going, that one of them created a generational curse to destroy that family and hid the details of that curse in a children's book, and also lived in a house that was kind of alive, kind of made of monsters, and forced whoever lived in it to defend the land from the monsters that are trying to eat the big bad corporation family. I love a good weird fantasy. I love a good magical realism story, and this one really nailed it for me for the most part. I do have some criticisms. I think that Harrow handles sexual and racial violence with kid gloves. As an author, I understand the impulse to skim over that a little bit when the point is supposed to be the generational trauma of it all. The themes are obvious enough to kind of punch you in the face, which is only a problem if you let it be. And I found both the capitalism is the enemy aspects as well as the romance a little simplistic, a little heavy-handed. That said, pretty much all of my criticisms are things that Harrow could have done and didn't, or could have pushed on harder and didn't, which means that I'm really more frustrated with the potential for there to have been a longer, slightly more complex, slightly deeper story than what I received. I still felt satisfied by this book. I still really enjoyed this book. I read it on a plane 2 weeks ago. I'm still having moments where I pause what I'm doing, think about something that I read, and I understand the story a little bit better, or where I catch myself thinking about a passage days after I finished the book, which means that it is still a damn good read as far as I'm concerned. The prose is legitimately stunning, and the characterization is fun if you let it be. It's not a true horror novel, for those of you who are concerned about that. It's also not really a proper romance. I think in a lot of ways it is exactly a true Southern Gothic story. It's about a small town's dark secrets slowly floating to the top of a toxic river in a place where nature and decency are fighting back against industrialism and poverty and a government that won't listen, all rooted in folklore and a really gorgeous narrative voice. It reminds me a great deal of Boy's Life by Robert McCammon. Or maybe Gallant by V.E. Schwab, maybe mushed together with a hefty dose of something that is altogether its own. I think that it would pair really nicely with a cold glass of bourbon on a humid summer night, or maybe just with a hot cup of cocoa on a freezing cold winter's day, which is really the criteria that I look for in any book, but especially a piece of modern folklore, especially if it's set in the South. And this meets all of the criteria of that. So what did you think about Starling House? Please discuss in the comments. Thoughts, analysis, anything that I missed. Did you like it? Let me know, and if you want to, forget about me. Discuss amongst yourselves. Totally good with that too. Now, because this is a book club, if you're still here, which if you're still here, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Let's talk about next month's pick. For February, I think that just in time for Valentine's Day, I want to go back to a reread of one of my favorite socially conscious romances, The Princess Bride. Yes, the book version. So get a head start on that now. Request it in Libby if you haven't already. And yeah, support your local libraries. Support your local libraries so much. I'm going to do my best over the course of this year to choose books that will be available in Libby or that you can get for relatively inexpensive as an ebook. And we will reconvene in a few weeks to talk about it. Make sure you subscribe so that you don't miss the official book club meeting. And in the meantime, my channel is home to often snarky, usually nerdy deep dives on books, writing, sometimes Broadway. Please give those videos a quick look if you want to know a little bit more of what I'm about, and I will catch you next time. Bye!